Hello, Elissa. Thank you so much for chatting to me tonight. I'm very excited.
Oh, I'm excited too. I mean, you and I used to see each other in person from time to time, but it's been years. It has
It-
been years. This is the only way we do this.
I know it's ridiculous because we only live 20 minutes from each other.
It's crazy.
I know it's really sad, but this is an important chat for me because I get to talk to you about how your music really changed my teaching life and changed my piano playing life. Because you made jazz and music in, or in jazz is such a wide term, isn't it? You
Yeah,
made it really, really accessible for me. Your music and Christopher Norton's music and Karen Bailey's music. But
yeah.
it was especially special for me because
Oh,
I sort of met you at the time that you were doing it. So, but let's just wind right back because what I want to
okay.
know is what were your earliest piano experiences like, and in terms of, and where did the jazz influence come in?
Right. Look, because we had a very quick conversation yesterday, I think it was, just about what we might talk about. I've actually been thinking about this and going, how would I trace it back? And I think it's kind of important to know that I grew up on a college campus. Like I was a faculty kid, and the college was filled with high school students and tertiary students as well, who everybody was a musician. I mean, maybe there were a few people who weren't, but just everybody sang. Everyone played the guitar. Everybody was, like just to entertain yourself, you would get together with friends and create a four-part harmony thing. Like this isn't me, I was just a little kid, but all of the students on the campus were just doing musical things all the time. On top of that, my mum, who was, quite young, like she was only in her 20s when we moved to the college, she dreamed up all these amazing performances that the kids put on. I mean, kids, they were young adults, that put on. And some of those concerts toured New Zealand, and so it was just this very music performance, wide ranging styles coming in at me. But the main thing was just everyone was making music all the time, and so the idea that you only make music from the page just wasn't present in my life, because that was that was one way of doing it, but mostly if you were making music, you were just making music. Like you just pick up the instrument, use your voice, create it, on the spot. I mean, I can remember, you know, down at Himatangi Beach. It's a beach in New Zealand. It's got very black sand, so it's not actually a place. It's very different to an Australian kind of beach. But go down there, it'd be cold. Put the driftwood together, make a fire, and everyone would just start spontaneously singing. And this was just,
Wow.
just how my life was. It was just filled with people being spontaneously musical all the time. And I think that's probably the most significant single factor in terms of the the establishment of my sense of how to be musical, like, and how to, like, it certainly wasn't something that you wait for somebody else to compose it and put it in front of you in sheet music format and then practice hard, and if you're good enough you can perform it. I mean, it was the polar opposite of that. So
Mm. Yeah, you're really marinated in music. You're
yeah.
really immersed. You have this immersion that that Jeremy Siskin was talking about. That
Right.
you have to that's what it really takes. It's like a language in itself,
Yes.
certainly. To feel comfortable with making your own music, and you just have to be immersed in it like any language. So
Yes.
what about your early literally
Actual
piano
piano, right.
lessons, actual piano lessons?
Okay. So the I wanted to learn the piano so that I could compose music. Like I decided I was going to compose music first. And then it was like, well, how will I achieve this ambition? And I clearly need to learn how to play the piano. So I was a bit cranky because my mum wouldn't let me start having lessons until I was 6. And I was like, I've got to get cracking here. Like you can't be starting the piano when you're like, is that too late already? Was my 5-year-old thinking. So pretty focused little 5-year-old. Um, but yeah, so I started having lessons when I was 6, but I've been incredibly fortunate with the teachers that I've had. My first teacher, Miss Francis, people from Palmerston North will remember who I'm talking about. Mavis Francis was a very important figure in the music teaching community in Palmerston North. She was completely relaxed with me showing up and saying, I don't like the way Beethoven finished this sonatina, so I've rewritten it. And she'd be like, great, let's see it. And so that was fine. And she never tried to negotiate with me going, well, you can do it your way, but really you have to do it Beethoven's way. There was none of that. It was just like, oh, good, that's good for you. If you didn't like it, you've redone it. Good for you. And I think that just openness to yes, this is just what we do, matched very nicely with the environment that I was growing up in, where you just make music all the time. And, it just was never an issue of contention that you should make, like, of course you should do things that come into your imagination. That's what it's all about. So I was really, really lucky to have a teacher who never tried to make me feel that it wasn't my job, or that I must have an attitude problem if I was trying to rewrite Beethoven, all those sorts of things that you might imagine a teacher might say, like, how dare you? Don't you know that Ludwig knows best? I mean, there was just none of that. So I was really lucky in that regard. Um, and of course, I was very interested in using my skills, not just to pass exams and win competitions and that kind of thing, but I was really interested to use my skills to make music in all of the other ways in my life. So, playing for people to sing, or dreaming things up that were kind of crazy as well. It was all just part of a continuum of being human.
That, that is just such an incredible beginning, and how incredibly
Yeah.
lucky you were to have a teacher like that. Because I know that you probably have quite a personal connection with everybody who's going to be watching this webinar. And the majority of us have a piano upbringing that's not like that at all.
No,
In
no.
fact, and mine was like I never played a single note that I did not read until
Oh,
I mean that was just me. So for teachers who are hearing this, I mean, you've come to this with from the point of view of everything was okay, you're comfortable making your own thing. But for teachers who haven't experienced that, just
yes.
at least they can hear you. Like I feel like I just want to be like Mavis Francis. I want to be that teacher who says, "Oh,
Yeah.
good, that
Yeah.
that's okay." To give our students permission. And
Yes.
the most important thing is to give them permission.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And look, I should also say, I mean, part of what I did when I was with Mavis Francis, we also did exams that included improvisation, extemporization, spontaneous harmonization. Um, the various stuffy exam boards had these 19th century style assessments that were still part of the syllabus, and I was probably the only kid in the country taking them. But she, there was a great openness to, let's go as far as we can with what you're doing. And um,
Amazing.
and and I do think that if I'd had a teacher who was, here are the answers, learn the answers, repeat the answers, that's how to be a good musician, I don't think I would have been very interested in pursuing a long-term career path as a musician. Like, it was just like, there wouldn't have been the intrigue, and there wouldn't have been the the sense of discovery that's kind of essential to, waking up the next day and going, yay, it's something good,
Yeah.
something's good, good's going to happen today because I'm going to discover something new. So,
Yeah.
mm,
That's amazing. So let's talk about your path towards, like, if we compare your path to, say, Jeremy Siskin's path, whereas he was, yeah, sure, he had piano lessons, he had a teacher who exposed him to jazz, and his line of work is as a jazz musician, and he has pretty much nailed how to teach jazz. He has a course on that, blah, blah,
yes,
blah, which I've done, etc., etc.
yeah,
But your path was more, well, you've written so much educational piano music. Um, you've given everybody this gift of all these wonderful Pepperbox Look, I've got the original.
Oh, look, I know
This
that's
is the original.
Sam's one of the OG because that's a version that you can't buy anymore. And
Yeah.
and I
Got
think
lots of
that's
sisters.
from 1999. Pretty sure that
Yeah.
was published in 1999, that one.
Yeah. I'm a bit of an Elissa Milne groupie. This is the more updated
Yeah,
version.
that's the up. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But it's this book. See, this pretty much changed my teaching life, my playing life, because I could open it up and I could sound like a jazz pianist. So
Well,
your
look,
path
yeah,
towards creating
towards that.
notated, fully notated
Yeah,
stuff that no, we don't have to make it up. It's there
yeah.
on the page for us. Tell us about that.
Okay, well, look, Christopher Norton, huge impact, not because of his music so much, because um, I was I was already, you know, a very functional adult pianist by the time Chris's stuff was being published. So it wasn't a part of my musical upbringing at all. But it was arriving on the scene while I was in my late teens and early 20s. But I went to hear him speak about it. I think it was in 1992, somewhere in those early 90s
Yes,
anyway.
it was
Um,
when micro jazz came out. He did a micro jazz tour.
And were you at the conservatorium when he did that? I remember being in, oh, I can't remember the name of the rooms, and it probably doesn't even exist anymore. But it was in a room anyway that was like a concert space, and it was a big room, and it was full. Like everybody had come to see Chris Norton talking about these books that were so revolutionary and everything. And the thing that really stuck with me is him saying that he went to great lengths to put the details in and to go, I'm going to put the slurs exactly the way that they need to be to make it work. So if you are sight reading the piece and you do it accurately, you're actually going to sound pretty much the way you're supposed to sound. The
Yes.
the detail of accents and
Mhm.
details of dynamics and all the rest of it. And I was just like, oh, that's actually really interesting because in comparison to classical notation, jazz does require so much more attention to those differences for two reasons. There are two reasons for that. One is if you don't know what you're doing with jazz, you don't have it inside you already in terms of how to shape the phrase. You're going to try and shape it like it's Haydn and you will sound ridiculous. So, if that's your background, you really need someone to actually go, no, 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 we need this particular note to be louder than that one. And then we need the next one to be even quieter still. And then it's going to be 100% the way we want it. And then
Yeah.
you play it that way and go, oh, magic. It really, really is. And
Yeah.
I'd never thought about doing that much hand holding. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
throw the notes down. I mean, I wasn't writing educational music at that point and I wasn't considering it. But that stuck with me in terms of that's smart. That Chris guy, he's got it. He's figured that out because, yes, if you can make people feel successful, of course they're going to want more of what you're offering because
Yes.
what you're giving them isn't, oh, here's my glorious thought. Like, oh, I had this amazing idea and it's such a great idea. It's not that you're delivering. You're saying, hey, I'm going to take you on a journey. And when you travel this path, you are going to feel so good inside your skin. You're going to feel so good inside your own musicianship. And you're going to get to the end of it and go, oh, that was fun. Let's do it again. And that's the thing that impressed me with Chris's presentation that day, that he had really thought through how to make it easy for people to come into this space and to come into this world. So time passes and we get to maybe 3 years later. It could have been 4 years later after I heard Chris speak. I'd just finished an education degree at the University of Sydney, which was the single most depressing experience of my life, but that's another conversation. But getting to the end of that experience of seeing what people were dealing with in the New South Wales education system and seeing what was expected of students, I thought, oh my goodness, I really should write some music. Like there's a need. There is actually a need, and I can meet that need. I can help with this problem. And so when I came to write my own music, I very much used Chris's example and his description of how he went about things. That was front of mind in terms of forcing myself to think through the details and I find that very painful. I actually sitting down going, is that exactly the way I want it? Like, do I
Yes.
really want that dynamic? Do I really want that
Yes.
slow? That I find that really, really tedious, but it's so worth it. It is so
Yes.
worth it. So
Yes.
I do
Because
it.
it's something that it's like a jazzy articulation would come instinctively to you. It's what you've
Yeah,
heard, it's what you've experienced, it's how
yeah,
you would normally play it. But
exactly.
to write a crescendo and an accent to an accent on the last note of a phrase just before a rest, you have
Yeah.
to do that because that is not how, as you say, we're going to play it. If we play it in the style of Haydn, we are going to
Oh,
this lovely phrasing, which is not going to be jazzy.
and look, I've got to say, there are some pieces of mine that even though I have notated it like exactly the way I don't know what else I could do. You know what I mean? Like I look at it and go, have I not been clear enough? Like what else could I add? Even so, some of like a piece of my bittersweet
Yeah, I love
in
sweet.
Paperbox Jazz too, I've had a lot of people send me their performances. Like I'm talking not students, I'm talking grown-up adult people who love it, and they send me their performances, and I'm quite astonished at how classical it sounds because it's really not. And I'm I think it's one of those things that if you still need a little bit more. Like with some pieces like Bittersweet, you still need to really relax into the idea that the feeling of down doesn't have to happen on the downbeat, and there's all those kind of subtleties that come into play. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's
I totally get where you're coming from. And I have to say, I've only recently started paying a lot more attention to the articulation
right.
of jazz music since I've done Jeremy's course and realized how important
Oh,
it is.
so so. Look, it's something I actually say a lot to my students. Say a lot to my students. This is one of those pieces where you've got to think in a completely different performance approach than you would if you were playing classical music. This is mostly the case where the melody in the right hand, if you play it the way you would a classical melody, it's going to get swamped. You're not going to hear it. It's just going to be like, who cares? Not interested. With some kinds of music, the right hand almost needs to be strident in a way that would be inappropriate in classical music. But it's just not going to, you're not going to get the emotion right if you're not prepared to let your right hand be super, super bossy and your left hand be so chill in its own space. Like it doesn't have any ego in this. It's just doing its thing. It knows it's cool in the background regardless. And the right hand gets to shine. And if you behave that way in classical music, it would just be disgusting. But if you don't behave that way in this kind of music, you just look like, well, I don't want to call people names, but just it's just not a good look. It's not a good look.
Yes. So let's talk about now your educational piano music. You said you
Yeah.
weren't writing educational music at the time. If Christopher Norton inspired you to, okay, going to get things on the page, and I'm going to get it on the page, like with his mantra in mind of like hand holding.
Yeah.
But then what was the path after that? And
Well, look, I mean, look, when I first saw Chris's stuff, I was like, oh, that's great. Chris is doing that. That's great. There's a few other people doing stuff like that. Brilliant. Wasn't even on my agenda. It wasn't even on my horizon. It was honestly only after I started doing some classroom teaching that I was like, oh, there's really quite a gap. Like there's a lot more that needs to be done in this area. Now, after I decided to self-publish the first collection, partly because I'm very aware that if you talk about something you haven't made yet, it's very hard for people to imagine it. And people bring their own biases and beliefs into what they expect the thing that you're describing is going to be. And so that's making it hard for people. So it's kind of like putting all the articulation in a piece of music. By self-publishing, I was able to go, this is the art I want on the cover. This is the weight of the paper of the cover I would like to be in your hand. This is the number of pages I would like on the inside. This is the experience
yeah,
I want you to have when you experience my publication. And by having it already published, it was very easy for a distributor to go, oh, I get what you're doing, I'll distribute that. And it was very easy for an exam board to look at the music and go, oh, I get where this fits in to a music publication. I'll include that in my exam list. And it was very easy when I went to Faber Music. I went and had a discussion about something else, but it was very easy for them to turn around and go, I know this isn't what we talked about, but we'd quite like to reissue your books and expand them in a bigger series, if you'd be okay with us publishing them. You know, you could already hold the book in your hand. So the same kind of, you know, I mean, you know what it's like to self-publish. You know what that's like to go, well, what will the weight of the cover be? What will the stock, you know, what,
Yes.
how does that contribute to the experience that somebody has when
Yes.
they're engaging with my ideas? So
Yes.
that was very important. And I might have lost track of what you were actually asking me, but that's part of the path.
Okay, so you were self-publishing, but then how did you get you said you were thinking a lot more needs to be done in this field after you got into classroom teaching. So
Yeah.
what led you to educational piano music? I guess I'm talking about you know, Little Peppers,
Oh,
essentially.
okay. So, okay, Paperbox Jazz was the first idea I had. And look, there is a whole backstory to the title Paperbox Jazz. We won't do that because we have so many more important things to talk about. But there's all kinds of little miniature narratives that wind in with all of this. But let's just say, okay, end of 1995, I decide, I know I can play. Well, I believe there was one particular night I was like, I believe if I put my mind to it, I could write music that would be very useful for piano teachers and would be very enjoyable for piano students. I believe I could do that if I put my mind to it. Having had that thought, I looked at the time and went, it's 9:30. And I thought, well, if I can write 3 pieces that meet my standards by midnight, I'll give this a red hot go. Like, but if I can't, if by midnight I haven't really produced anything and it's just kind of like, oh, hopes and dreams, strange beliefs about my own abilities, I'm just going to let it go. Like midnight is, you know, Cinderella at the ball, the pump, you know, it's all going to turn into a pumpkin and that will be the end of it. So I set to it, and that night I wrote Scoot. That's actually one of those
Oh,
pieces from
I
that night. And I actually wrote 2 others, which I don't remember what they were, but I did write 2 other pieces. But Scoot was my favorite from the 3 of them. And I looked at these 3 pieces by the end and just went, I think I can do this. Like, I think I only need to do this like tomorrow night, the next night, the night after, and maybe one more night as well. And I'll be ready to, you know, move to the next stage. So I was like, oh, well, that's quite good because this was late November. And I thought by Christmas, I could be ready to self-publish. So I was like, oh, yeah, that's a green light. I went to bed at maybe, you know, midnight going, yep, I've got a plan. I've got a plan for the rest of the year. Like that's what I'm going to be working on between now and the new year. And so, of course, that then, you know, I just finished my teaching, my classroom teaching degree, and I was doing classroom teaching work over the next 3-4 years. I had some different jobs along the way. They were all fantastic experiences. Some fantastic because they weren't, if you know what I mean. Like you learn a lot from the experiences that
yeah.
aren't, that kind of thing. But they were all like, it was a really interesting time of my life. And underneath all of that, I was, you know, saving my money to self-publish, figuring out, you know, doing that whole learning curve about what are all the things I have to do and, you know, ISBNs and of course pre-digital, right? So you know, you've been on the same path, that whole thing. And yeah, so that's what was going on there. And very much in my mind, right from the start was, this isn't actually going to work if the exam boards don't pay attention to it. So writing with one eye on what would be useful for an exam board to use as a piece they can use for an assessment. With one eye, I'm going to have more than 2 eyes by the end of this. With one eye on what are going to be great performance pieces for students to actually go, I want to show this off. Another perspective that I was holding in my mind was what are going to be really, really valuable learning journeys that a teacher can take a student through in the process of engaging with this music. And another thing that was in my mind once I got going was I want to be representative of a range of different pianistic techniques, of different grooves, meters, energies. I don't want someone to pick up a book of mine and go, oh, they're all very nice, but I could kind of substitute one for the other and it wouldn't make that much difference. I wanted each book to actually encompass a journey of its own as you went from piece to piece. And I wanted to try, I don't think you can ever be 100% successful with this, but I wanted to try to never publish something that wouldn't be a kind of essential, like when you look at it, you go, oh, I've got to teach this. I wanted every piece to be something that for one reason or another, a teacher might look at it and go, oh my goodness, this is going to be just the perfect piece for this. So everything, it wasn't just like, oh, I wrote a nice piece. There were plenty of nice pieces I wrote that didn't make the cut. They all had to actually serve some other function that I was like, gosh, when I'm looking as a piano teacher, I can't find anything that actually does that or that allows me to explore that. So it's got to be contributing something new or new to me, because obviously none of us know all the music in the world. So that's a bit of what was going on there. And again, I don't know if I've lost sight of your original question. I'm just free-forming here.
So when you were writing Paperbox, you had a clear brief in your head. You were writing to the market, had to be marketable, it had to be, you wanted it to be able to be played in an exam or in a concert, and you also wanted to have a range of styles and a range of teaching techniques. Now, did you have the same brief in your head when Little Peppers came?
Oh, that's what you asked me. You asked me, okay, so the Little Peppers thing, yeah, originally that was the Paperbox Jazz idea, but it wasn't very long after that. Like, it really wasn't long, and I don't know exactly how long, but one day I was sitting in a professional development seminar and I was not very interested. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, have we ever found ourselves in a situation where we're attending a professional development event that runs for a number of hours and we find our mind wandering a little bit? Well, I often do. And because I know that that can often happen to me, I always carry a notebook, a pen, and I can pull it out and just quietly look very studious and make notes that are actually notes about my own ideas while the webinar's going on. And I remember, oh, not the webinar, this is before we had webinars, the in-person real life workshop is going on. And I remember in this particular thing, my mind starting to wander and thinking, I've got these easier pieces that are kind of doing something different, and just started putting things down. And suddenly in the middle of this thing, I was like, oh, Little Peppers, that's what that's going to be. That's what that, like, and as soon as I had the title, I was like, now I know how they fit together. Now I know what my purpose is with them. And it just started off with, I had some students who'd heard the Paperbox Jazz pieces and they were like, why aren't you writing stuff I can play? So there was a little bit of people pleasing, I've got to admit, bit of people pleasing happening, but also it's an opportunity when you write easier things to really break it down and go, this piece is just going to look at one thing. Like, here's the one thing we're going to do. So I look at the Little Peppers series as being quite a different kind of purpose to the Paperbox Jazz pieces. And I think that's where your question might even be coming from, because we hadn't discussed this in advance. But the Little Peppers series ended up being a fairly comprehensive survey of all kinds of different things that you can do at the piano, different ways of using your body, different ways of different articulations, different ways to come out of a note, go into a note, different kinds of chords, different, just all of the things. And I was quite intentional about creating the 5-book series as being a survey of all of these different things. Now, culture moves on, and I knew that as time passed, the day might come where I was like, oh gosh, these days I'd include this, or these days I'd include that. But I've got to say, I haven't reached that point yet. I haven't reached a point of going, I need an extra book. Maybe I'll get to the end of the decade and go, yeah, it's time. But that was kind of the goal with the Little Peppers.
Yes. So they drill down more into single concepts, perhaps for each piece. We
Well,
try
they're
and
tiny, right? Some of them are
yeah,
only 8 bars long,
yeah,
and um, and I think it's really important to be succinct, not carry on. Um, and I think that value, however, I hold to less than I did 25 years ago when I, was working on creating the series in the very first place. These days, I think our attention spans have changed. So I think if I were to create a new series like Little Peppers, I might have different values in mind. But in terms of those pieces,
mm,
pithy, to the point, say your thing, get in, get out. Um, but I also wanted the pieces to be sufficiently open ended, so to speak. Like, not if they're short, they give the performer an opportunity to go, what else could I do with it? Whereas if as a composer you go, here's my idea, I'll say it again, I'll make a tiny tweak, I'll say it again, I'll do this other thing, I'll go over here. You just iterate and iterate and iterate. By the time the student gets to the end of the piece, they're like, oh, I am really over those ideas. Like,
yeah,
I don't want to have those ideas anymore. I wanted it to be, that's your introduction. Like, that's the idea. You can play a complete idea yourself. What are you going to do with it? Like, where are you going to take this idea? What can you connect it with? What can you do next?
mm,
And so keeping it short is part of that kind of a philosophy.
yes. And they're beautiful. They're gorgeous little vignettes, all of them. But I wanted to ask you, have you ever had the experience of either, probably not with your own students, but hearing any students perform any of your pieces and just thinking, yeah, they haven't listened to enough jazz. This is not working.
No, I can honestly say I've never had that experience. I've never had that experience. I've sometimes heard a student play my piece and I've thought the teacher hasn't heard enough jazz.
Right. So the teacher is not
I've thought
demonstrating it well enough or
the teacher
inviting.
thinks, yeah, I think the teacher thinks it's something else. But you see, a lot of the Little Peppers pieces aren't necessarily jazz. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
they're contemporary.
they could be jazz. Like, they're kind of standards in waiting, if you know what I mean. Like,
Yes.
if you took it and then played it with a jazz trio or a
Yes.
jazz ensemble, it would be awesome. It
Yes.
would be like
Yes.
something that I'd love to organize or have organized for me, but like organize is probably more realistic. Sometime in the next 25 years is, some performances with is ensembles that work together all the time, where they take one of the Little Peppers pieces and they use it as a jazz standard to create,
Yeah,
a jazz performance. I would be really fascinated to see
that
that,
would be lovely.
how that would work, because there's a lot in the little, the ideas in those Little Peppers is quite. Um, there's just a lot in a small amount. They're just little
Mhm.
seeds of stuff that could be, you know, sprouted forth. But look,
What about, sorry to
yeah.
interrupt.
Oh no, I was just going to say the only time it's really an issue is when I hear a student performing where the teacher has thought that the key signature's wrong, so they take it out of being mixolydian and they make it major. Like, so they raise the seventh again. That's happened a few times. Like, interesting and so wrong. And um, like, I don't mean to be too prescriptive here, but yeah, no, you
Like as if the
can't
teacher
hear.
thought it was some editorial error.
Yeah, like, my piece Sun Shower. Like, dum
Yeah.
bum 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 body ba dum. Instead of da ba da bum, it'll be dum bum 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 body da dum. And it's like, no, just
That is not what you
no.
meant.
I
What
mean,
about your
interesting for
more,
exploring. But sometimes teachers didn't used to know how to swing, but I think they can. These days teachers are becoming so much more fluent at moving from swing to not swing, much more than they used to be. 20
yes,
years ago.
yes, interesting. But that's your legacy, you see. Yours and Christopher Norton's
Well,
and Karen Bailey's. You've given us this music and made it so that we can play swing without having to make it up on the spot. You
Yeah.
know, that it's
Well,
there for us.
yeah, look, I've got to say, there's a huge body of work of people who've created material that swings. I need to just publicly say I could name 20, 25, 30 people, not all of whom I haven't met them all, but I think you've got John Kember in the United Kingdom. He's a generation like a generation or two older than me, and he's got a whole you know body of work where he's delivered this kind of thing. And there's people like that. There's people in I mean, I'm not going to sit here and list all of the names because I'll just end up embarrassing myself with who I miss out. So I'll just say John because he's bought me a scotch in the past, so he gets a special mention. But there's people all over the place who are doing this kind of work, and I also think that there's a lot of teachers who have come through over the last, our generation, even older as well, who've grown up in the 60s and the 70s with this kind of music just being all around them. And I think it's a very different world in 2022 than it was when we were having lessons in the 70s, where the teachers simply hadn't been exposed to
Yes,
it at all, like at
true,
all,
true.
right? So I do think that it's a bigger thing than just me and Chris and Karen. As
Yeah.
cool as the three of us might be, you know.
But certainly it's lovely to have Australian, these Australian New Zealand influences. But um, perhaps it's a mixture of, I mean, because there was all that, there was a lot of jazz around in the 20s and 30s and 40s that somehow didn't get played in the 70s. But maybe it's because of the ease of self-publishing, the ease of the digital publishing era,
Yeah,
especially,
well,
in the last 10 years that
yeah,
people,
but the 70s was glam rock, right? Like if you think about, well, what was the 70s was about getting out of Vietnam, and it was just about different stuff. And it was disco. It was all about disco.
yeah.
You think I was like, when
But
you
I
think
do
about those
think,
sounds.
but in the 70s, we weren't there weren't a lot of people writing things in the style of the 20s, 30s,
Oh,
and 40s.
that's true. And there was an aesthetic movement in art music that was this whole what I call blippity bloppity music. And it's been a while since I've used that phrase. I used to run seminars where I'd say, it is my dream, it is my vision that one day the encyclopedias will have an entry called blippity bloppity music because it is the perfect name for what it is. But you know what I mean when I say blippity bloppity music, that kind of boom, bottom,
Yeah,
and it's like, well, yeah, like,
yeah.
yeah, that's not this. That is not this.
No.
And I think there was a genuine belief in rarefied art music quarters that the evolution of humanity was going to go toward this blippity bloppity music, and people were going to find it deeply meaningful and find emotional connection and all the rest of it in it, which did not turn out to be widely the case, shall we say. So I think that, there are a number of factors going on in
Yeah.
terms of what that was about.
Okay, just circling back to being able to play a piece in the way that it is notated to have a successful performance. Let's talk about maybe two slightly more advanced pieces than the Little Peppers. And I don't know if these were ever present in Paperbox because they're in the Getting Two books.
Right.
So Lucky Duck and Blackberry
Yes.
Jam.
Right. Yeah. No, they are, you can now buy Blackberry Jam as a digital download. And
Great.
yeah,
Yes.
I'm currently not very good sales. I'm not a very good shopkeeper is the way I'm putting it. Like, it's hard to find my shop.
Okay.
Sometimes it doesn't even exist. It's like, yeah, I'm a very bad
They
shopkeeper.
will find
But,
it. We'll
but
put a link.
yeah, but
Um,
the Getting Two books is where you find both of those two pieces,
yeah.
and yes, they are both very
Yes.
much in that kind of spirit.
So
What was the question?
would they be pieces that you've heard brought off in a less than jazz way? Uh, like Blackberry Jam,
Yes.
you
Oh,
know,
have I heard people?
dum, 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 da, 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 difficult rhythm to read. Like you don't want people counting out one and two and
No,
three and four
no.
and if you've never listened to a big band before, you're not going to have a very successful time with that piece,
Yeah.
maybe.
Look,
Or
I
have
don't know. I don't know. See, here's my thing. Not so much these days because I order it in online, but I've spent a lot of my life in supermarket aisles, right? With the trolley, putting the food in the supermarket trolley, and while I'm cruising around the supermarket, there's all kinds of music being played. There's all kinds of stuff happening. And I think these days, anybody who's been to a supermarket has been exposed to these kinds of sounds completely by accident, completely without even meaning to be exposed. If you've watched television, you're exposed to it. If you've gone to a movie, you've been exposed to it. Like, you might not have ever intended to hear this kind of a sound world, but you would have to be living in some kind of very intentional shut off from all media space to have not been exposed to this quite a lot by the time we get to 2022, right? So, like the blackberry jam, I think the more likely thing, rather than not being exposed to it, I think it's more likely that people try and adhere to the page and they go, I have strategies I've been taught I must apply to every single piece. And so if I don't apply those strategies, I'm not doing a good job of strategy applying. And my purpose here is to apply strategies rather than to actually go, hang on, what's the piece about? What does it need? You know, what do I do differently with this piece than I would with another? So if you have someone who comes along and goes, I must count 4 beats in every 4-beat bar, and then I must put the and in between, and I must count it out loud, and all the you're going to end up with a very different result than if you come along and go, oh, ba da ba 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 ticka dum ba da ba ba bum. So you're starting off with that kind of, okay, I've got that groove in my body, and I'm going to go to the piano, and it's like, oh, where do I find the up and where do I find the down? Where do I da 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 ba da ba? You know, like, how am I using my body to shape that is a very different kind of approach to 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 4. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yes. Yes.
long answer, strange answer. But those are my thoughts about blackberry jam.
So I think it's so encouraging to know that you haven't heard your own music watched up very much.
Yeah, but that could be I haven't heard it very much, right? Like,
Or maybe you've notated it so well that it is that
flattery,
visible.
flattery. I don't know. I don't know. I think it's actually probably more likely that I haven't gotten out much over the last 10 years or so. I think that's actually much more likely the reason.
Yes.
But, you know, people do share stuff on YouTube, and sometimes I get people sending me messages that have videos attached. But I do also think those performances are likely to be on the better side because
Yes,
people will
of
feel
course.
reluctant to share something that they don't think's
Yeah.
pretty good. So yeah, I think I've probably just been a little bit leading a sheltered life, to be honest, Sam. I don't think that's probably the more truthful.
I doubt it. Okay, so what is your big tip for teachers who feel like jazz is currently out of their comfort zone and they want to bring jazz into their comfort zone?
Such a good question, and good questions are difficult to answer. What would I say? The first thing is start with a sound in your head, right? So if there's a sound that you go, I'd really like to make that sound myself, start with that sound, because I truly believe through experience, not just it's just a crazy belief I have, through my lived experience, I truly believe what we can imagine, we can create. And you can't execute what you can't imagine. So if you're going, I'd really like to play something that I don't even know what it is, I'll try. Guess what? Ain't going to work very well. You actually have to start with, what is my intention? And if your intention is to play, I don't know, I'm now thinking through what are the possibilities. You know, there's some jazz that's kind of got that a chord kind of scatters out and it's almost got a kind of vibraphone kind of sound going on and kind of magical boom, and then a little bit of double bass underneath, and then the piano comes through with a couple more really lush chords. If that's the kind of thing that you've got in your head, going to the piano and actually going, how would I, how might I even start to make those sounds? Listen to what the sound is in your imagination and go, how could I create that myself? Like, what are the elements involved? Like, how would I even begin to do that? Now, that's not a tip that goes, and you will easily find wonderful results and live a beautiful life. All the best to you. That's not that kind of a tip. This is a tip for how to kind of abandon the classical approaches and strategies that work really well for that kind of repertoire. How to go, I'm giving myself permission to just pop them over there and take a completely different approach here because I'm wanting a different result. The saying, keep doing the same thing, expecting a different, you're wanting a different result, you need to take a different approach. So I think starting off with really listening to what's in your imagination and then thinking through, if I can imagine that, what else could I imagine that's different that I'd also be interested in doing? And how are they different? Like, really just giving yourself permission to imagine you can actually make the sounds that you hear. You can make the sounds that come into your mind as a memory or an evocation of something that might have happened in your past. Or, maybe it's a little bit of an advertisement that you've caught before your YouTube video came on. It could be anything. We just go, oh my goodness, that little musical snippet's in my head. How would I play that? And just go and experiment. And it's an unbelievably powerful way forward. But the problem we've got is that most of us, and I'm not one of those people because I had the fortune of my wonderful first piano teacher, Mavis Francis, but most of us have been brought up to think that that's mucking around, it's not getting on with the job, it's naughty. Do your work. Like, don't do that, right? And so to actually go, hang on, my actual job is to muck around. Like, that's the job. That's really difficult. I think to get over that and go, that is my job.
Yes.
That would be my one tip, to understand that your job is to muck around.
Yes. So yes, you've got to muck around. You've got to be comfortable with mucking around. Yes, give yourself permission to muck around. And when students are mucking around, also we need to educate parents that that's also their job. That is so valuable, and we don't want to
shut that down.
And you don't want to shut that down and say, oh, but what about the music on the page?
Yeah, no, I think one thing that I don't do the you have to spend X number of repetitions of this or this number of minutes on this piece and then your practice is done. I will do that if a student is just woefully not going to meet a deadline with a performance and they won't, and there's reasons why that performance is still going to happen regardless. I might do it in that context, but that's the only one. I will actually say to parents, what counts is that they go to the piano. I don't care what they play. I don't care if they're doing what I tell them to do. What we do in the lesson is, that's one thing. If they're doing something completely different through the week, so long as they're at the piano, that's fine. Like, I really can't begin to emphasize enough how much I don't care if they don't do what I tell them. Like, I do not care if they don't do what I tell them, so long as they're at the piano. Because if you're at the piano, you're listening. If you're at the piano, you're noticing how your body feels. If you're at the piano, you're finding out how the geography of the keyboard interacts with your body. You're doing all the work. That is the work.
Yes.
One piece or another piece, not really that big of a deal. They can come and have a nice time with me in the lesson, and when they're ready, they'll do that. But I mean, my goodness, if every student just sat at the piano for 2 hours and mucked around every day, if they mucked around at the piano for 2 hours a day, oh my goodness, all of our lives, all of our lessons would be transformed in ways that none of us can imagine. And insisting on the do your practice first and then you can muck around, or all of that kind of thing, I don't understand why we do it to ourselves. I don't understand.
think it's because that's what we know. Like I was never asked, I was never told to go and muck around at the piano for 2 hours a day. I was told to practice my scales for 2 hours a day. And I did it very diligently. And it didn't occur to me to do anything else. And I think there are probably so many teachers in that same boat
Yeah,
where
I agree.
they
I
weren't
agree.
ever given the idea or given permission. And therefore, it's not something it's easy to pass on to our own students if we've never experienced that.
No, because we think to ourselves, I'm not being a very good teacher. If I don't have them doing those things, maybe I'm not a very good teacher. Maybe I'm letting them down. Maybe, you know, just maybe I'm not very good. You know? And oh my goodness, I mean, as parents also will know, like it's not just a teacher thing, it's a parent thing, to actually give the child who is in your care, whether it is a student or a parent or whatever context, to actually go, you know what, I trust that their learning will take them where they need to go. And their time, I am responsible for their time with me. And I'm not responsible for the rest of their time because they will go on their path and they will find amazing things. So I can't control that. And I don't want to control that because the more I try to control that, the less likely it is that they're going to develop to the greatest extent of their potential. That's a hard that is a hard lesson for any adult, teacher,
Mm-hmm.
parent, whatever. That's real discipline on our part, to go,
Really is.
I will let you go to and then come back to me next week and we will engage again and then
Yes,
go free. It's hard.
yes, yes. Well, that is a brilliant place to end. Thank you so much for a
My pleasure.
conversation.
Now you make me want to do this every week, Sam.